Okay, so you're probably gonna want to edit some of this out here, but I'm probably gonna
That
have to,
part.
probably gonna have to
Off to a
do.
rollicking start.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Presenting Alfred Hitchcock. Episode 3, The Lodger, A Story of the London Fog from 1926. I'm one of your hosts, Kenny. With me, as always, is Sam
Hey.
and Lance.
Hello.
Now, this is the second movie requirement if you are doing the Hitchcock challenge with us since the last movie was missing. So everyone's had time to watch this one. But if you haven't, Lance is going to give you a really quick synopsis so you can listen to that, pause it, go watch the movie, and come back and join us. Lance, take it away.
So, The Lodger, released in 1927 to acclaim from both audiences and critics, is considered by the director himself to be the first real Hitchcock film and lays the foundation for many of the themes, tropes, and stylistic flourishes Hitchcock would explore throughout his career. The story begins with the murder of a young woman on the streets of London and a terrified witness recalling before a crowd seeing a man, his face hidden by a scarf, leaving the scene of the crime. On the young blonde woman's body, the police find the calling card of the Avenger, an apparent serial killer who has been terrorizing London for months. News of the murder quickly spreads as the city learns of yet another young woman killed, police apparently unable to catch the killer. In this atmosphere of terror and dread, a mysterious stranger with a scarf pulled up over half his face appears out of the London fog and on the doorstep of an older working class couple looking for lodging in their home. The young man seems haunted and displays some peculiar mannerisms. Despite this, the daughter of the couple, a lovely young blonde woman named Daisy, takes a shine to the new tenant, much to the annoyance of her suitor, a local detective named Joe. Joe is immediately suspicious of the lodger and resents the obvious interest Daisy displays toward him. Thus, the stage is set for suspense, drama, romance, and a surprising amount of sexual tension in what is considered to be Hitchcock's first great film, The Lodger. Okay, done. How was that? Was that
Well
okay?
done. Good writing. That could go on the back of a DVD box as always.
So I want to get into, before we get too off track, The Lodger is the first movie we're reviewing that is pretty readily available. You can watch it for free on YouTube and it's in the BFI restored version, so perfect. You can spend some money and buy the Criterion DVD or Blu-ray, which is also perfect. You can spend money on the Criterion Channel app and watch it there streaming. So there's lots of ways to watch it. You can buy a bootleg like I originally did from Stop and Shop or a grocery store for about $5 with 20 of his movies on it, and it will be a really crappy bootleg copy. Don't watch those. I mean, if you do, you're gonna hate the movie, and you're gonna be like, you're not gonna watch our show anymore. So try to watch the good version. Okay, this movie has multiple soundtracks, so let's break into this right now.
There are two different versions. One has a really bad soundtrack, and one has a really good. The one that I watched that had a pretty decent soundtrack was the score was by Ashley Irwin.
There's actually three that I've heard. There's the two that are available free on YouTube. There's the Ashley Irwin soundtrack, which I listened to yesterday, and I agree. I really liked that one. The second one that's also on YouTube, I think Sam watched, which is by a guy named Nitin Sawhney. I looked up how to pronounce it because I've been notoriously bad at pronouncing names. He did the soundtrack in 2012 when BFI first restored the movie, and that was sort of a more modern soundtrack.
Yeah, that's the version I saw was the BFI 2012. It's on YouTube. It's a beautiful print. It's restored like amazingly. Everything looks, rich, and the tinting is great. The soundtrack, it's fine. I didn't have any big problems with it, although there were points in it that felt or sounded a little more modern than maybe like anachronistic. But I try to imagine myself if I had seen this when it came out, I'd be in in a theater and there'd be an organist and they just have a bunch of directions like, you know, this scene is suspenseful or this scene's romantic, and they'd have to improv at the time. And if you hold things to that standard, you know, these exceed what you would have expected as a film goer back then. Do they match the mood of the film? Not always, but I think they do their job. And that's the best I can say for this one. But I didn't hate it. A lot of the comments I read in YouTube, and you dig into the comments, but a lot of people in the comments didn't like it. But maybe I'm not as discerning.
And there's pop songs.
Right? There's a pop song in it.
Pop songs that just it's a little incongruous. I became aware of the fact that, you know, rather than the music kind of amplifying the scene, I was like, oh, that's odd. You know, it kind of took me out of the movie. I didn't watch all of that one. I just watched segments of it, kind of scrolled through it. I watched one with the Ashley Irwin soundtrack, and I watched it on YouTube. And it was a decent soundtrack. I felt it wasn't overly modern, which can sometimes be disconcerting and kind of throw you out of the scene. It was appropriate to the time. It had a few there was a few moments where I think when he picked up the butter knife, which we'll discuss, they actually had a Alfred Hitchcock, the strings in Psycho, like the flip flip flip. Kind of funny, but other than that, everything was pretty what you would expect for a silent movie.
The Criterion one, which is the one I've watched most recently, has a soundtrack by Neil Brand that was done in 2017 for the Criterion DVD release. There's actually a documentary with him about the making of it on the Criterion that's worth a watch. This is the Ashley Irwin soundtrack, beginning of the film. And this is Nitin Sawhney's soundtrack, same scene. And this one's Neil Brand.
Now, the film famously starts with this screaming woman, and I think you can't have that without the orchestra doing the scream. But from then, I've used the scream to cut across the rhythm that I've set and set a much slower, much darker one.
But yeah, I would recommend that one, and then the Ashley Irwin one if you're of the free variety.
I will say just really quick that the version that I saw with the Ashley Irwin, the print is not great. The title cards weirdly look brand new. So it was the film itself. It was tinted, and it was tinted to nice effect, but it was a little distractingly, crappy in terms of quality, and with these kind of jarringly new-ish looking title cards.
Let me jump in on that. Those title cards were done by a guy named Edward McKnight Coffer. He was an American-born graphic designer that was brought in. According to Hitchcock, the movie was not reviewed well by his bosses, and he subsequently lost control of the film to editor Ivor Montague, who was brought in. Montague's contributions to the film, according to Brenton Films, were to remove many superfluous intertitles, tighten the editing, and order reshoots. To that end, the scenes featuring the first victim, the showgirl victim, and the lodger's mother were all added after the fact. So Hitchcock had to add a couple of scenes, and they brought in this title card fella, Edward McKnight Coffer, the lurking silhouette figure that we see at the beginning, the triangle designs all throughout that allude to the Avengers calling card. Those were all products that he brought to it. According to a 2020 book that just came out, an art book titled E. McKnight Coffer, The Artist in Advertising by Caitlin Condell and Emily M. Orr. For nearly 20 years between the two world wars, E. McKnight Coffer, an American, was the most celebrated graphic designer in England. He was best known for his eye-catching posters, but his book covers and illustrations, graphic identities, carpets, stage sets, costumes, and ephemera were also among the most arresting of his era. Coffer's distinctive artistic perspective quickly gave rise to an outstanding reputation that by the early 1920s, one of his clients could placate a waiting public between designs by papering billboards with a label. A new McKnight Coffer poster will appear here shortly. So he was a household name, according to this book, at the time this movie came out in England. So people seeing his artwork would have recognized it as his in the movie. He's described as an avant-garde artist, and I actually really liked them. We had talked about before that it's a shame in a way because we still haven't seen a Hitchcock card, and that was how he got his start in the film business anyway, as an art director making title cards. Pleasure Garden, the cards were replaced by Raymond Rohauer. The Mountain Eagle, I don't know if we mentioned this yet, but it was lost. And now we're on the Lodger, and it's done by Edward McKnight Coffer. So, maybe Downhill will be his cards. We'll see. That's the next episode. Although, Lance, I don't know. It sounds like, do you not like those, the titles, or?
No, I thought they were awesome.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry I gave that impression. No, they're beautiful.
Our disappointment was purely that we didn't get to see the hand of Alfred himself, right?
Yeah,
that's what all three of us were complaining about. They're cool designs.
Let's talk a little bit about, if we can, about the script. So this is Elliot Stannard Elliot Stannard took the book Lodger and wrote a scenario for this. We know he's done a bunch of Hitchcock's early silent films, but the book is by someone. Want to jump in here?
Sure, I'll jump right in. So the book The Lodger was by an author named Marie Lowndes. I think I'm saying that right. And it was a bestseller. And it was not only a bestseller, but it was something that the literati of the time were fans of. Ernest Hemingway and Gertrude Stein both had little blurbs about Marie Lowndes. Now, does that mean it was good? No. I mean, or elevated like literary fiction. It was a popular novel. It was a fun, suspenseful, popular book, like a Stephen King kind of book. This book was, it's the kind of the Jack the Ripper motif. But from what I've read, it was based on someone else. It was based on someone named Dr. Thomas Neal Cream, who was a kind of a religious fanatic, you could say, and was, a well-known murder case at the time, although nowhere near as well-known as Jack the Ripper. So I think there were elements. I think it was a bit of a composite story where she might have taken some elements from real life, embellished them. I tried to read it. I got about chapter or two in, just wasn't clicking with me, but it was an easy read, and I think it's free on the Kindle app if you're so interested. If you want to read the book and then decide if the movie was better, you can go ahead and do that. But this is something that I believe is worth discussing, which is that a lot of these early silent films were adaptations of books, and silent film is silent. The number of cards is limited, and I think there was sort of a goal of having fewer cards in a story because it's a visual medium, and you want to tell the story, you don't want to read it. So so working from source material that was familiar to the public probably gave directors like Alfred Hitchcock a little bit more leeway in terms of their storytelling technique, and allowed them to assume a certain level of understanding of the plot on the part of the audience, which let them do things a little more vividly or a little more adventurously. Or
yeah, I think that at that time too, I think the movie came out at a really great time, probably for that, because Jack the Ripper, the actual murders, they seem like years and years ago for us, like another planet. And for them, it was the
Jack
1880s.
the Ripper was 1890s, wasn't it? Or
1888 or something, I think, around that area.
Jack the Ripper was arguably the first kind of sensationalized, serial killer, what we would recognize as a serial killer, and broadcast in the early days of mass media. Right? It was a highly sensationalized and terrifying, murders that happened in London. And I think that it still resonated, it continues to resonate, but it certainly resonated during that time. Certainly at the beginning of the movie where we see this, sort of mass media dissemination of the latest killing. And you can certainly link that to Jack the Ripper and how all of London was kind of held in thrall over these series of grisly murders.
Yes. Yeah. Well said. It really sets up the dynamic of not just the media, but of the mob, and the crowd, the frightening mob and mob justice right from the get-go.
The other influence I wanted to mention was Dracula. That was the other one that I don't know. Maybe I'm alone on this one, but I know Dracula was maybe 10, 20 years before Jack the Ripper, I think. So it's somewhat recent. But the Nosferatu movie had just come out in, I think, 23, which was like 4 or 5 years before this movie. And when we start talking about Ivor Novello and his performance in this movie, there's the Jack the Ripper element, but there's a lot of very particularly strange things he does in this movie with his hands and just the pale look that he has that kind of brought Nosferatu to my mind, sort of a very, very handsome Nosferatu.
Yeah, definitely a strong Edward Scissorhands kind of vibe.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. The dark circles and the kind of gaunt, look, and even when his, was what I'm sure we'll get to, but when he was handcuffed and he's being, fed brandy, he definitely has that. There was more than a little bit of an Edward Scissorhands vibe to it, I thought, but yeah, you definitely see the influence of Nosferatu and German expressionism throughout this film, certainly more so than the other one that we watched before this.
A couple more things just on background before we move on. Yeah. That I wanted to bring up is that this is interwar London. This is interwar London. This is after the Great War, but before World War II. And at this time in history, London really was the biggest metropolis in the world and kind of the center of global finance and all kinds of other stuff. So London was the city in the collective imagination of, it had the kind of grit and romance, and it still does. Clearly, but I guess the analogy would be like in the 20th century, be like New York in the later 20th century, right? Like it was just the sort of cultural hub in the West, in a way that it still is, but it's not quite it's not the single focal point the way it used to be.
And we see some great shots early on of what I'm guessing are real city streets. I'm not sure where did they film this? Do you guys remember? This wasn't in Germany.
No, I don't remember.
Didn't make a note.
We should look that up. I think London.
Yeah, The Lodger was either released at the same time as The Pleasure Garden or slightly before. And
so from my reading, just and this could be wrong, but my reading is that this movie was his first film that was released to the public. And on the success of this movie and how well it was received, they went ahead and released Pleasure Garden and Mountain Eagle. I don't know. Do you guys have a different story? But
you're the expert for the film.
That's right.
We're gonna roll with that.
Film 101. Indeed, my credentials. The sum total of my credentials is an intro to film class at Santa Barbara City College.
This became a hit. It became a hit only after studio intervention, though. Because it was shelved right before it.
Well, supposedly, according to Hitchcock before doing Pleasure Garden, when in his early going, he was working with a director called Graham Cutts, and he was the bee's knees. He was the top guy at the studio, and he apparently at some point decided did not like Alfred Hitchcock. So he had something to do with this being shelved originally. Apparently, Hitchcock said he'd seen it. He said he couldn't make heads or tails of it. It didn't make any sense to him. It was ridiculous. And that might have influenced the movies being released when it was. So then they brought in Ivor Montague.
But I know that part of the problem is Hitchcock wanted to leave the lodger his guilt or innocence as deliberately vague, and the studio was not having that because Ivor Novello was a hugely popular leading man, and in those days you just didn't make a leading man. There's just the audience was not gonna. There'd be a rebellion, if they tried to make him a villain, because they insisted that he be vindicated, which I think facilitated a rewrite and some other things like that.
Ivor Novello, talking about some of the casts too, before we get into this, was brought in. He's probably the first major star that Hitchcock's worked with up to this point. He was very famous at the time. He's a mega famous composer, his biggest hit being Keep the Home Fires Burning, which was a patriotic British song from the First World War. Playwright, stage actor in a lot of early movies, had a huge Beatles-like fan base of women because he's a very handsome fellow. I'd read that his funeral, he died relatively young. Like when he had his funeral, it was almost everyone in England was at it. It was just mobs and mobs of people. Like,
a service of affectionate remembrance for Ivor Novello, Prince of Gaiety, who in dark days and fair helped to ease the weariness of so many and bring happiness into their lives.
Yeah, after you watch this movie, you see why. He's definitely a talented guy.
Yeah.
But the lead star in those days, if you were a handsome leading man, you could not, the logic was you could not be a serial killer at the end. So that him being cast then forced the movie to have the ending that it has, which is that he is not the killer.
That's still something they only do to actors who past their prime. Like they still would never cast a handsome young leading man as a killer, right?
Yeah, Harrison Ford, did he ever play like a murderer, a serial killer? Like, I feel like actors today want that challenge. Like, if you're a typecast a certain way, you kind of want to beat it and do something completely different.
So it'd be more like Tom Hanks playing a villain, which I can't recall off the top of my head any movies that he's ever been in where he wasn't the Jimmy Stewart kind of all-American guy.
I don't know. Didn't we just call Ivor Novello the Edward Scissorhands?
When I first watched this movie the very first time and he came on screen, I was just, this is prototype Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp is just like, watch this guy, and was like, that's my career. And maybe he did 21 Jump Street and then saw him and then was like, you know what, that's it. Going forward, creepy, weird, handsome guy. That's my thing,
This is my asinine theory of show business, which is that everyone is just some version of someone who came before. Like every celebrity is just like the this year's model of someone from the.
You always want to attribute to somebody, oh, they invented this shot or they came up with this thing. It's the early years, but you realize it's not everything. Nothing's in a vacuum. The glass ceiling shot in this movie, I had read that Eisenstein, the Russian director, he had been working up for years on a movie set in a glass house, and Hitchcock would have known he had been working on that. So the concept of doing a glass ceiling, where we're like, oh, he's a brilliant, what a shot, it's actually, you're inspired by things. There's a definite lineage in creativity where you see something and you kind of take it and make it your own. It is interesting to keep that in mind going back, that, these guys are all, there's a lineage from the actors and how they're acting to the directing to how they're filming it.
Certainly once you bring up acting, that would be one thing. So there's so much of these early films, the language of cinema is being developed still, and we haven't even gotten to sound yet, but lighting, editing, the mise-en-scene, all these things, are still being developed here with, acting styles of that period versus the realism and kind of method acting of now. Particularly in this movie, I would say even more so than Pleasure Garden. It's very stylized and theatrical. Doesn't resemble modern acting, the way that a modern audience would view it.
It's funny because Pleasure Garden, I do remember saying, you know, in Mr. Levitt in that movie was like almost like a modern actor. Like he's doing kind of this method where he's drunk at the end of the movie. I think the only actor in that movie that reminds me of some of the acting in this is maybe Patsy, the Virginia Valiant, you know, who had a bit of hammy facial gestures. But this movie, yeah, you have Ivor Novello, you have Malcolm Keane, who was plays Joe, the police detective, and he was in The Mountain Eagle, so we've already talked about him a little. He has multiple scenes in this movie where he looks right into the camera after doing something, like in the television show The Office, like he's like looking for our help from us at home, like, you know, like this girl just turned me down again, and you know, guys, you know, and so
there's the gym.
One actor that was not hamming it up, June Tripp, whose stage name was simply June, was a relatively famous stage actor before The Lodger, and this was apparently how she became friends with Ivor Novello, leading to him suggesting her for the part in The Lodger, part of Daisy. She was only in a handful of silent films, I think like 4, before retiring at an early age to become a socialite, which is also my dream. In 1960, she wrote an autobiography titled The Glass Ladder, the title taken from her mother saying that the stage is like a ladder made of glass. Step too heavily on a weak rung, and it splinters under your feet. The book is out of print currently, but I did find a line from it, or an anecdote, that is kind of interesting and something maybe for us to think about going forward. So here it is. This is June herself speaking. All I had to do was carry an iron tray of breakfast dishes up a long flight of stairs. But by the time Hitch was satisfied with the expression of fear on my face and the atmosphere established by lights and shadows, I must have made the trek 20 times, the tray seeming to grow heavier every passing minute. During that exhausting hour and a half, I felt a strange, sickening pain somewhere in the region of my appendix scar, but forbore to complain or ask for a rest, because delicate actresses are a bore and a nuisance, and in my case, this scene ended my work on the film. Period. What's interesting about that quote is that I could not find that scene in the movie. So whether or not that was cut by Hitchcock when the movie came out, by Ivor Montague before the film came out, or just has been lost and is not available in current prints of the film, I don't know. I did find a scene of her carrying the tray, which you can see above. There is an interesting book coming out, probably around the time this video comes out, called The First True Hitchcock by Henry K. Miller, which is going to talk a lot about the behind the scenes of The Lodger and probably have a lot of cool in-depth stuff. I know I'm looking forward to reading it, so I can't recommend it yet, but it's something to look for. And even Marie Alt, who plays Mrs. Bunting in this movie, has a lot of great overacting, suspenseful looks that she puts on, where you kind of read the scene just from her face.
A lot of touching the mouth.
Yeah, touching the mouth.
Which I've been also doing throughout this video. It's part of my immersion.
Hands off your face, come on. We're in a pandemic right now, Sam.
That's right.
The movie starts with this really great montage sequence, as The Pleasure Garden did as well. You know, it's something Hitchcock definitely wants to make sure when you sit down into his movie, you're sucked right into that world.
And at the time, what would have been a very strikingly modern way, you know, to just have something go from, you know, this horrific event to reportage, then transmitted all around. That must have had the sort of thrill of the new at the time.
Right. You see the reporters go to the phones, right? She's talking, relating the story to, and they're listening and they're writing it down. They run to the phone. Then you see the teletype, and you see the story being written out by teletype, which to me, I mean, must have been very modern, you know, at that time. And then it cuts to a newsroom where you see these giant machines cranking out newspapers, and then it goes into a truck. And then you have that amazing scene where it's like a camera obviously mounted inside the truck, and they're driving through the city, you know, throwing off papers. So you definitely get a sense of that thrill of mass media and instant communication. Like no sooner did the murder happen than everybody in London knows about it, right?
Yeah. And no sooner did it happen than a large mob assembled and began speculating as to the identity of the killer and where they might be. So you kind of get a little preview of what's to come. But the media thing definitely seemed like something that was not just a point that was being made, but a great economical way of telling a story. The exposition has to happen, and reading it on the screen, but not in card form, is pretty ingenious.
And he's even able to give sort of it's like a cynical take, it's a murder wet from the presses, sort of this like the modern rapture at getting this news of a murder.
The newspaper man, where he talks about how it happens every Tuesday and it's a great day for him.
You can tell he's very proud of this scene too, because he puts himself in the movie. This is Hitchcock's first confirmed cameo. There's a guy in the newspaper room as the things are going by, and he's like directing the madness in front of him, people running by. That's been acknowledged as being Hitchcock. I think he says that in the Truffaut book. That's him. And also he puts his wife in that scene, or soon. He's either future wife or the current wife. Or they're definitely dating at this point. But she plays one of the people listening to the radio. They're doing close-ups of just 4 or 5 people's reactions to hearing the news, like shock, suspense, confusion, and like.
Is that the scene where there's like a dissolve, right? And it's people. It's just kind of close up.
It's just a very extreme close up of their faces. I think the
fading between these faces, which must have been kind of an interesting technique at the time.
And there's I'm sure the very intentional connection to, the lurid news and the way the murder is sensationalized extends to the film that you're watching. It's a movie about a serial killer. So
you're complicit. You're
yes.
Part of the mob.
Yeah. It's another turning the camera on the audience thing, where not in a literal way, but that we saw in The Pleasure Garden.
So one of the first things I wanted to mention to you guys, the triangles, which are in the title cards, are the triangle for the Avenger. And I started to realize that the triangle is also kind of the symbol of the lodger. He puts it on the map later on in the movie. 3 times in the movie, when Daisy shows up, it says her name as a title card. And I was just kind of like, that's weird. She's the only character that's doing that. It's always accompanied by a triangle, which is meant to suggest danger. Is that it's kind of like, be on the lookout. She's might be in trouble. And it usually precedes a scene where, something with the Avenger is being brought up. And the heart shape is Joe's shape, because there's 2 scenes in the movie where heart is used with Joe. One is where towards the end of the movie, he draws a heart on the map around the serial killer. It's like a very rough heart. And then the scene early in the movie where they're cutting batter and he makes a heart out.
They're making cookies, ungracefully flirting with Daisy and saying that he also had a penchant towards blondes like the serial killer. The probably one of the worst pickup lines in theater and movie history. And obviously it failed. Definitely kind of a turnoff when you're trying to flirt with a girl and you bring up a serial killer that's terrorizing the city. So, for all you single guys out there, don't use that one.
So we get the news travels. We get to finally the modeling studio. The models get the news. We see Daisy for the first time. It gets the triangle right next to her name. And then we see her. She just heard as she's about to come out that this murder's killed another blonde.
We probably shouldn't. We would be remiss if we didn't mention that on the sign, the blinking sign says "Tonight Golden Curls," which I guess is the girls that will be dancing, and they're all blonde and peroxided. And of course, now they're all terrified because they know that they're a potential victim. And we do see, I think, in the very first scene, when the woman is killed, or we see her body lying on the ground, the first shot is really kind of the only shot of her is her hair, massive golden hair lying on the ground.
Very dramatically backlit.
It's not a dance studio though, right? Is it just a modeling agency, the Tonight Golden Curls, or is that supposed to be? Is that where Daisy works? Do you think?
Well, no, you're right. So that was okay. That's a point of confusion. I actually don't know. It seemed like we saw Daisy at probably the modeling studio where she works, right? But all those women are blonde, right?
Well, that was the thing. They were all wearing blonde wigs.
Do you know if she was actually in that scene? I actually don't even remember.
She is. is she when she's not in the backstage when they're showing people, but when they show her after modeling, she comes out and a brunette. No, and the one other blonde jokes to her that she needs to like wear these brown hair clips so when she goes home, and that she's definitely talking to her there. So I just assumed, same place, but maybe that's not right.
Yeah, I don't know actually. I think I kind of mushed those two things up in my head. I didn't really think about it. So
all right. I think I just thought that the Tonight Golden Curls was where Daisy works. It's like a modeling. It is. We just watched Pleasure Garden too, so I get confused on that. It's like they're both at these kind of entertainment venues.
Right. Yeah.
And the behind the scenes stuff, I'm speculating here, but I feel like he really relishes going backstage, and there's a comfort with the cast that maybe that's a lie. Maybe they were actually very self-conscious, but to me it kind of feels like being backstage. It feels like you were just hanging out. You're like a fly on the wall, and you're observing people having their very natural reactions to this.
Right. Yeah. For men, it's taboo, right? I mean, you're in the ladies' dressing room, right? So you can see how that would be kind of titillating.
All right, so moving forward in the story, we're getting to the actual Bunting's house now, and the news reaches Mr. Bunting. He's entering his house. He gets the newspaper from a toothless newsboy, and he comes in, reads the paper. Joe's already hanging out there. Joe, the policeman, played by Malcolm Keane, is presented to us as sort of a family friend. Like, he clearly can just enter the house whenever he wants, and everyone's cool with it. Who's dating Daisy at this point?
I don't know if they're dating per se. I mean, it's
courting.
I definitely would say they're courting, yeah, because I would say, and he's kind of hanging around, pursuing her, and we do see some moments where later where they're like making out in a room, but
quite a bit,
yeah, a little bit. So I don't know. Anyway, sorry. That's
why did I think they were engaged? Did I make that up?
No, that does come. He mentions it later.
Okay.
But yeah, that's where he has the line Lantz mentioned earlier, which is I wrote it down. I'm keen on golden hair, same as the Avenger, and I was noting that it's interesting that so is the Lodger, so is Alfred Hitchcock. Everyone's keen on golden hair. But what's interesting to me is that Alma Reville is a brunette, so maybe Hitchcock's trying to live out like the fantasy he doesn't have.
His wife is not a blonde bombshell. His wife is a petite, dark-haired woman. He has a type, obviously, but his wife, I guess, it was obviously, and they obviously had a good relationship. I mean, from what I understand, but it is an interesting side that maybe, maybe his muse, her sexual interests were, different from, I don't know, maybe she put on a blonde wig for him when they got home. I don't know, but
it's just interesting. It was just interesting to note. But so yeah, this is where Joe makes the two hearts in the dough, does the symbol. His symbol, this is kind of me stealing a little bit of other analysts that I've read thinking about it, but where they say Joe's an open book and the Lodger's not. And I was thinking the heart as Joe's symbol makes sense because we as the viewers know exactly what Joe wants right from the get-go. We know he's interested in Daisy. We kind of sense that he's a good guy, but we also know he's got this penchant for being a little rough. He rips the heart in half. Later on, he gives her one of those punches on the cheek, and he's kind of handcuffs her to the banisters. But like we basically know Joe kind of he's a pretty easy book to read, whereas The Lodger is the complete opposite, and by necessity of the story, where we aren't supposed to know what he's thinking. We're not supposed to know anything. And I even wrote a note that the first time we see the Lodger, he has his hand like over his heart, like covering his heart. Again, am I reading too much into this? Is this like, are we getting too much?
That is an interesting observation. I hadn't, who knows?
No, I might want to just caveat that by saying I agree, and yet I think you're supposed to suspect him, and the movie misses no opportunity to paint him in a sinister light, all but saying like this guy is the Avenger,
right?
Again and again and again.
In some ways, more like almost like ham-fistedly, kind of absurd. Like when Daisy serves him and he picks up the knife, and then you're, like it's not a threatening weapon at all, but but the insinuation is, if he's a killer, who knows what he's going to do with that knife,
It's like a butter knife.
Yeah, that's right. It's not a frightening looking knife, so it's kind of absurd. But
even towards the end, when he turns Daisy around at one point to kiss her, like his hand kind of moves slowly up to her shoulder and spins.
Yeah, it's very, very icky.
Maybe a little Nosferatu, like
definitely, definitely a bit of a Nosferatu vibe to it.
So the film makes no or wastes no opportunity to make us think that he is guilty. He's the killer. There are all these visual signals. There's all these really loud scenes where it's heavily implied,
especially his entrance, where the way he's eyeballing Mrs. Bunting, you're just like, why would he do that? Like, if he's not a creepy killer.
You could argue that we're in that scene, we have the point of view of Mrs. Bunting, and we're seeing things through her perspective, although that is a bit of a stretch. Throughout the movie, we're reminded that he is of a different class than they are. They're sort of the solid English middle class couple, and they're hanging on, but they need a lodger to make their finances work. In fact, when he comes in, the conversation they're having is about lighting the gas. Burning gas costs money, but they need a lodger. And so you really get the idea that these are not people. These are people living sort of hand to mouth. So they put their suspicions aside. So they're in such a situation where they invite, just put it out there. There's a serial killer roaming London, and he wears a scarf, and he's kind of a mysterious cloaked figure. Just as you hear this news, some guy knocks on the door who matches that description exactly. Your first thought isn't, well, my God, tell him to go away. Yeah, wait for a young woman to show up on the door. Whatever the case, like, you don't want to let to a killer, but they're in a situation where they do. Is our suspension of disbelief such that we can believe that? I don't know, but I guess we're supposed to be meant to believe that, or meant to think that these are desperate people who.
I'm going to be honest. I just think it's kind of clumsy storytelling, or like, I think it was kind of, it's still early days, and I feel like that's my feeling, is that he just kind of was trying to play it up. And again, this could be the studio intervening.
I think he's definitely playing it up. What was it? The gaslight dims in the house. We see a shadow approaching. Their number, I think it's the only time we see the number on their house, is number 13, which I'm assuming has always been an unlucky number. The door opens, and we get this is the one thing this movie has, that in a few great scenes of just iconic images, and that image of Ivor Novello standing in the doorway with like the fog behind him, the hand up, and the scarf over his face. It's just, and her opening the door to that. I think it's just fantastic. It looks great. It's as good as any of the Nosferatu creeping shots. It's just really fantastic to me. But yeah, is it overselling that we should be suspicious of this person right off the bat? Yes. Does Ivor Novello then proceed to make it even more by like slowly pulling down his scarf and like making his bug eyes at her? And like, I think he actually closes the door himself too. Like he's locking himself in with them. Like, it's way over the top. The thing that's interesting to look at from his perspective is that he's on basically like a quest, or like basically his mother's dying wish is essentially that he should solve this crime. It's like, you swear to me that you'll find this Avenger, you, my fae, sort of not someone I would pick in a fight.
He doesn't fit the mold of a he's no Liam Neeson.
Liam Neeson is always angry and avenging something, isn't he?
Right. He avenges with extreme prejudice, but yeah, I mean, he, in a sense though, Ivor Novello is the Avenger, right? Because he's trying to avenge his sister's death for his mother.
So if you look at it from that perspective, he comes in the room, he's supposed to find this guy's killing blondes. He's got, for some reason, all the pictures on the wall are blondes, essentially. So they're just looking out at you.
It goes both ways, right? Because I think you again, as the audience, you're sort of being lured into this belief that he, or hit over the head, rather, with this idea that he's guilty, because maybe he can't stand, the image of these young women, a young blonde woman, because his sister was one, and it's a memory of his sister,
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. We also have that great scene that you mentioned earlier of the cross on his face. Again, amazing shot. Very I don't know. Cut that.
Iconographic.
Iconographic. I don't know. Love that shot. That's like I would put a poster of that up.
That's awesome.
Really good. And this he has with him. We should probably mention here the bag, which to me I kind of wrote down like with a question mark. The Maguffin of the movie essentially is that bag which contains the secrets. We as the audience see him immediately lock it up, and it becomes more important later because now we're supposed to be, well, is his the murder weapon in there? Is he what's he got in the bag? And it comes out later. So I don't know. I mean, it's like, yeah, it's funny. Like a lot of these notes you've gotten through. Okay, he's being a creep. He's being a creep again. More of a creep. Joe mentions he's glad that he's not keen on girls.
Undercurrent of, homosexuality. I don't know.
There's actually 3 title cards that question like whether he likes girls. Miss Bunting says, "Don't be silly, Joe. He's not that sort." She also says, "Even if he is a bit queer, he's a gentleman."
Well, when they say he's a bit queer, I mean, I don't know that had quite at that time. I don't think it had the quite as much of a it hadn't been sort of adopted as a term to mean gay, right?
I think it was starting to be used around the time of this. And like Sam mentioned, London's the center of the world at this point. So if anyone's going to know about it, it'll be them.
I just can't see her. So queer is definitely a pejorative. Like a proper English woman probably would not. And again, I'm sort of maybe projecting a lot here and making a lot of assumptions. I just don't see that as part of her character. A proper middle class person to even be talking about men liking other men or women liking other women. It was. I think queer was more like odd or strange. That's queer. That maybe, but maybe it has overtones of that. I don't know. It's a question for
the experts. Reading from an article by Merrill Perlman in the Columbia Journalism Review. Since it first showed up in English about 1513, queer has always meant something not normal, something peculiar, something odd. Counterfeit money was queer. Someone who is sick might say they feel queer. Playground bullies would call someone queer without knowing or intending any sexual connotations. The Oxford English Dictionary says the noun queer was first used to mean homosexual by the Marquis of Queensberry in 1894. The Concise New Partridge Dictionary of Slang says the adjective queer began to mean homosexual about 1914, mostly in the United States, and notes it was derogatory from the outside, not from within, a hint that it was being embraced as a self-description even then. So I don't know. I think he's exploring fetishes all over the place. The foot fetish thing is definitely in here because Pleasure Garden, we've got a dog licking Jill's feet at the bed, which is close up. And in this, we get a girl in the tub, Daisy, and we get 2 close-ups. Like he just shows it once, cuts to Ivor Novello, shows it again. So I don't know. I think he's exploring what he's interested in. I wanted to mention the title. They jumped to a title screen too, another one of the McKnight Coffer title screens, which is reused multiple times throughout the movie, it's basically like a house made out of triangles. You guys remember this? Mm-hmm. With a window in it, and it has like a bullseye. I really tried to study this thing before with a bullseye, and it kind of suggesting like the danger is in the house, the triangles, the Avengers. It was a really, it's clearly a cleverly thought out title card. It's probably, I think after that, McKnight Coffer was like, you're gonna have to pay me more if you want more of these. They were like, we'll just reuse that one 3 more times throughout the movie. But that was a cool title card. And it's basically pointing out like subtly, the lodger is the killer in the house. And over that, it said one evening, a few days later, the lodger made himself agreeable. And this leads to him hanging out with Daisy and the romance.
Yeah. So a lot of misdirection to try to have the audience believe to an extent to where you start to just feel like, well, yeah, he's definitely not the murderer because obviously they're trying to make him seem like the murderer, which us as been steeped in movies and cinema and books, media our whole lives. Like that sort of redirection is so obvious to us. I don't know. Maybe it was less obvious to an audience then. I don't know.
The general trend of the film is, Lodger shows up, disrupts this world. The honest and good and, upright characters that we've been introduced to at the beginning, the Buntings and Joe, are immediately suspicious of this guy. Well, immediately. They become increasingly suspicious of this guy, even as Daisy gets closer and closer to him. So we, as the audience, are feeling like, Daisy, what are you doing? And we're hoping that Mrs. Bunting is going to find out who he is before it's too late. That's sort of the arc of the film early on. So so leaving aside what happens at the end, like, we are very concerned for her safety. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Yes.
We're concerned for her safety, and he's exhibiting strange behaviors. And of course, there's the scene.
He's a freak. He's an unhinged freak. He's an absolute monster.
Yeah,
and
right.
There's nothing in this movie that makes him seem like anything less than the psychopathic serial killer that we're led to believe he is, until way late in the movie.
But he's kind of a sexy monster. We can't forget that.
Well, and that's what the movie keeps hitting us with, which is that this guy is he's a man of means, and that's what blinds everyone, or at least it blinds Daisy, and it initially blinds the Buntings.
He's just got all his money out on the mantelpiece.
He's got his money out on the mantle, exactly, and the allure of the gentleman, and the refinement, supposed refinement of his manners. He kind of acts and behaves in a really, can I say, cretinous way, but we're he's a gentleman who plays chess and who has fine clothes and who has piles of money, and so and really odd habits, constantly pacing, taking the pictures down in his rented room because they're paintings of women, just like psychotically acting in a psychotic manner. I think one thing that was in the novel, and I don't remember if it's in the movie now, but as a little character piece, is that he requested the family Bible from the Buntings as soon as he was given clearance to let this room. He goes up and starts reading from the Bible very loudly, passages that are denigrating women, and the turn happens instantly. It's the woman, the Mrs. Bunting, thinks, what a nice fellow. He's a man of some faith. And then when you hear him just sort of shouting the I guess, I don't know what old, but very fire and brimstone Old Testament stuff about women, that just completely shifts your perception of him. So so he's a creep, but he has money, and that's why everyone tolerates him.
So that kind of segues us to where Mrs. Bunting actually starts to suspect him. There's a second murder. Joe, at this point, has already been appointed to the case of catching the Avenger now. So things are tightening a little bit. First, he sneaks out of the house. Mrs.
Yeah,
Bunting,
that's something we haven't mentioned. So there's a murderer stalking London at night, killing women. And this guy, who they just rented a room to, just happens to have a habit of going out at night and stalking around London.
Out on Tuesday nights.
On Tuesday nights, yeah.
He's trying to catch the killer, guys. Come on.
Yeah, but
we know.
Well, we know later.
Yeah.
There's just a great shot here that I really like. So he's creeping out, the Mrs. Bunting. There's a lot of really great shots in there, but one of them, she looks out the window and there's this shot of him walking away quickly from the back. And it's a shot I like because it's used a few more times. The one time in this whole movie where we actually see the real killer, the actual Avenger, is, I'm assuming it's him, is after this girl is killed. We see her look up, scream, and there's a quick shot of a man walking away, and you just see the back, and he's walking quickly, but like not running, just kind of this very determined walk. And it's kind of very sinister. It's like someone who's not afraid of being caught, who's just committed the murder. And we get that, again, because we're getting it banged over our head that the lodger is the killer. We get a couple of shots of Ivor Novello doing the same thing, one when he's coming home, one when he's leaving, where it's the same straight upright, quick walk away. He's got the same similar hat on. There is something very creepy about it. It reminds me of like a David Lynch type of a shot, like a dream, like all the shots are done in the blue tint. So it's got that night kind of creepy look to it. But I like that. And this is kind of where Mrs. Bunting is putting the pieces together. The suspicions. She goes and checks his room while he's out.
Yeah, she goes snooping around. And what does she discover? There's a locked cabinet.
The Maguffin is in.
Yeah.
She's onto it now.
I like Mrs. Bunting. She's a very likable character, even if she's snooping on her lodger.
She's a good, well-formed character too, for like a female character in a Hitchcock movie so far. I liked Patsy too in the original one, but compared to Daisy, who I guess kind of all over the map. You don't know what she wants. She's like this kind of, is she a silly girl? Is she just go with any?
Her character is kind of has the least, in a sense, agency. She's just sort of vacillating between these two strong men, and who are sort of competing over her. She does sort of, I guess, at the end, take a firm stance on, she does show some, backbone, but earlier on, she's just kind of seems like wishy-washy, just kind of,
She lets Joe drag her around and kind of just start kissing on her whenever the heck he wants, really, except for the one time she gets mad about the handcuffs. But, she's very, even the lodger, when he starts coming on to her later, like, the scenes of him taking her head in his hands and kind of guiding her for a kiss, where she does lack agency. Whereas talking about Mrs. Bunting now, she's almost like the Sherlock Holmes of the story, more than Joe. She's on to the lodger.
Right.
Yeah.
Joe is just, kind of pathetic, but yeah, no, and she does a lot of storytelling, with her face, right? There's, and as Sam had mentioned earlier, her, hands coming to her mouth. And just long, sort of takes, like, cuts of just her sort of dawning realization, or of her kind of working out in her mind, and the horror that's kind of rising inside of her. She's kind of does a lot of the setting the tone of rising anxiety and terror.
She's definitely all the lookups to the ceiling, to the lights. The lights are presented as ominous in this movie. Lamps, the swing. Is the lamp swinging? Is the lamp not swinging? Those are used a lot. There's a really interesting shot I picked up again. This is on like the 5th viewing, which I think is really cool, that I wanted to mention. It's just so right at the morning after the murder, Joe is coming into their apartment, and now the Bunting's kitchen is located below street level. So there's always a window where you see people walk by and then they come down the steps to get into their kitchen area, which is a lot of scenes take place there. Right before Joe enters, we see, this is my pickup. And at first I thought it's nothing, but the more I thought about it, I'm like, this is intentional. We see a black cat run by and then run down the steps right in front of Joe. Joe enters the house. This is a set. So I'm like, how many cats are running around the set? Immediately after Joe enters, Daisy screams from upstairs because a mouse has scared her. And I was like, this is ham-fisted cat and mouse. This is Joe the cat, the lodger the mouse. They're on to each other. And it's like right after the murder. And again, he used number 13. So he's using that superstitious kind of iconography. Do we decide that's the word? 13, black cat. A little ham-fisted, but it was
pick up on that. That's a good catch. That's a really good catch. The cat that leads to the mouse.
Yeah, I just noticed. Well, you always notice a cat when a cat shows up, so I'm like, oh, cat. And then the mouse thing right after is too coincidental. I was thinking it's funny that Joe, right after a murder, he shows up to just like the Buntings and just like, I'm just gonna tell you all about it. Sit down at the table.
Yeah, he's got a free reign in that house.
It is scary that police would wear just regular suits back.
Well, he was a detective, right? He's not like a.
But they never. Oh yeah, you're right. They were police in police suit uniforms. I'm just thinking when they come to arrest the lodger later, it's a bunch of men in suits, like it's like the G-men swarming.
Yeah, right. Yeah, they look like FBI agents of the time.
Like, how do you even know they're police?
But that's probably the way it would be today too. If a high-profile thing like that, it would be the top brass.
So at the mouse scene, when they run up to the mouse, this is the first time we see the lodger kind of dressed down. Like, you know what? Maybe I'm going to take a break from my avenging and hit on Daisy a little bit. He's got on this really cool light colored gray sweater. He's not wearing the scarf. He's not in all the blacks anymore. Now he's kind of switched gears. The next time, then he goes to visit Daisy at work to see her doing her modeling. He dresses to the nines for that.
Which is an interesting scene, by the way, because I just don't think there's much of an analogy. I mean, not that I know of, not in the circles that I hang out in, where a wealthy gentleman just goes to, this agency where these women are sort of circling through right on this stage, I guess, and wearing different outfits. And he's just standing there. Does he have a cane?
Yeah, he had a cane. He's smoking a cigarette. He had a top hat.
And there's two women that are sort of on either side that are obviously kind of adoring him. And one woman takes out a cigarette, and without even looking at her, he just takes his lighter out and lights her
I love that.
And it's very suave, and then Daisy comes out and she sees him and he sees her, and there's a moment where they're connecting, and then we find out that he orders the dress she was wearing, that she was modeling. Buys for her.
Yeah,
obviously very expensive for this. Which
is, if you buy the story that he's not the killer, he's just interested there. Sure, makes some sense now. He's actually acting a little bit less creepy, although the cigarette.
Yeah, he seems like a young man now, a little bit more and less like just a haunted kind of troubled person.
So I think he kind of switches gears back after Mr. Bunting basically returns the gift, and it's like, yeah, no way. No way we're taking serial killer gifts in this household.
So Mrs. Bunting has certainly influenced Mr. Bunting and now he's, paranoid and starting to believe the box comes and Daisy opens it up and she sees that it's a dress, and everyone's kind of at first happy for her, right? Oh, wow.
Yeah. They probably think Joe got it for her.
Yeah, right. And then when she finds out, when she says, it must have been him who was there today. Suddenly, Mr. Bunting is horrified, and she doesn't understand because she has not been privy to the conversations that Mr. and Mrs. Bunting have had.
Yes, and now she's basically banned from seeing him, I guess, or him from seeing her. Mr. Bunting
goes upstairs and gives him a talking to, right? Gives him the dress back and says, you're not allowed to give gifts to my daughter. I don't know who you are.
Yeah, it's an interesting suspense scene because it's one of the few times they show like a man in this movie with like fear, because Mr. Bunting has this, it's his own house and he's creeping up the stairs like he's like nervous to go talk to this lodger about returning the gift. And even when he gets to the door, he kind of like pauses before knocking. And it's kind of this suspense being set up, that maybe he's now in trouble by coming in here. And that's how bad this movie wants us to think that this lodger is just gonna start knifing people. He's cut off a little bit. This leads to another scene that I really wanted to talk about, which is the bath scene, because I think, again, it's a Hitchcock women in intimate moments, I guess, is kind of what I wrote down. It's kind of like how we talked in The Pleasure Garden, how he does this scene of just two women talking while they're undressing casually, and him showing just enough where he's not showing nudity. And this scene is the same. It's Daisy taking a bath. We see her disrobing, and we see her getting into the tub, and it's no matter what you think of the lodger at this point, it is creepy that he tries the door. He knows she's in there. She's singing in the bathtub. There should be some kind of fog coming out because we get the fog from the heat.
Does he try the door? It's like
he does. He tries the door, and I think he tries it twice. And I'm like, all right, if he's not the killer, he knows that she's in there taking a bath.
Well, he kind of listens, so there is certainly a voyeuristic aspect there.
Yeah,
and it definitely reminds me of like Psycho, right? The shower scene where
it's definitely a prototypical kind of. But I think it goes in hand with Hitchcock wanting to show us people in their private spaces, and that the private spaces are dangerous. That the danger is not outside the house; it's in the house. The bullseye is in the triangle house. Yeah. So. But he really likes to, and I like this about him. I do like this about him because he lets the scenes linger. He lets you see, it's not just her, like, I'm in the bathroom. But one thing that's interesting in that cut that I made a note thinking about is that when she does come to the door to talk to him, both camera angles are with the actor on one side and the door on the same side, kind of alluding like they're on the same side, like they're together. I was thinking like in The Shining, when you have Jack Nicholson about to take the axe to the door, you have him on like the right and the door on the left. And then when you cut to Shelley Duvall on the other side, the door's on the other side. It's kind of the way you would think, like the camera just moved through the wall and looked at her. Whereas in this movie, they're both, like the camera didn't just move it to the full other side, because now you have the lodger knocking on the door like this. and then it cuts and it's Daisy from the same position talking to him with the door on the same side. So both of they're on the same. I don't know. My head was like, it's a weird way. It's a choice to make, because I would think the easy shot would be flip it. The shot would be show him knocking and then show her on the other side. There's a door between them.
That would be the more conventional way, definitely.
Right.
I honestly didn't even notice that. It's interesting observation.
Yeah, I love these nuances that you're picking up on. Is that breaking the line? I don't know if that is breaking the line.
Breaking the line? What do you mean?
Yeah, well, in when there's like this invisible line that in movies you're only supposed to break with intention, which is like just like imagine the camera, the point of view of the camera is like having a 180-degree radial area. You can't break past the 180 degrees and go on the other side of the character, because if you do, it messes with your spatial logic, like the viewer's spatial logic, so they can't understand that someone's flipped around.
Right.
That's why you're supposed to always shoot on one side of the action, wherever that happens to be. But you can break that rule. But that's a really good point. It's like I don't know if they were. I think he was just showing us like inside and outside.
Well, no, I was just remembering that we forgot. There's the scene where Joe handcuffs her to handcuffs her to the banister, which is a little bit striking, and that's kind of also where everything comes to a head, right, between the lodger and Joe. It's
another scene of Joe being physically sort of not abusive, but just showing like this kind of violent tendency, maybe towards Daisy, a little aggressive.
And that's when the lodger comes out of his room, right? And he's looking down the staircase and he's like, unhand her. And
it was actually Mrs. Bunting that runs down the stairs, but he's already let her go at that point. And then she immediately forgives him in the other room, but then runs back to the lodger. So Daisy, I don't know what's going on in her head.
Torn between two lovers.
Torn between two worlds. Two creeps. One slightly violent policeman, and the other one possibly a serial killer. Probably is, even though the movie says he's not. So the lodger manages to convince her to sneak out of the house with him, and this leads to Joe catching them together under the street. Yeah, for some reason the lodger takes her right to a street lamp that looks very similar to the one we just had seen a woman killed in. I think it's actually the same street lamp.
Yeah, it looks like the same set maybe, or location. It does kind of feel like a set.
Yeah, maybe again to make us be like, oh, he took her to where he killed the other lady.
The whole scene is really being played for, you think it's all going to go down.
Yeah.
The suspense and tension are ratcheted up.
We get a great shot of Joe here, basically getting dumped by Daisy, again with him looking into this camera at us, kind of looking for a little bit of help as she demands the lodger takes her home. And that leads to one of the big shots, which is Joe basically piecing it together, doing what Mrs. Bunting's already done, and sitting down at the bench with his head in his hands and looking into a shoe print where we get, I wanted to write down exactly what he sees in the shoe print, because now we're in Joe's head, and he sees the photos being turned around. He sees the Maguffin bag, which makes no sense because Joe at no point in the movie would have ever seen the Maguffin bag. He sees the lodger and Daisy kissing, which also actually hasn't happened. So that's just maybe in his head. And he sees the swinging lights. And then somehow from those four elements, he's the lodger is the killer at this point. It's great. It's filmed great. Malcolm Keane has another great face, that likes the camera when you're up close with him. I like that shot of him slumped over. I like the kind of, like the aw shucks persona that he has. He's like a sad sack detective. I could see a Jimmy Stewart in that role, maybe, or someone later on. And then we cut to, now we're back to the lodger and Daisy in the room. I kind of wrote down as the love scene.
A very odd love scene. That's where you were describing earlier, where his sort of reptilian hands turn her around and cradle her. It's it's iconic, but it's also a little unsettling and odd, and I'm sure that was intentional. But it's a very strange love scene, and then they go to the couch, right? There's the armoire, and then he rather violently pushes her away, and I wasn't sure what was going on there. I don't know. Maybe you guys have some opinions on that. I was puzzled by that. Maybe it was because he still has this mission in his head that he needs to avenge, his sister. But Daisy is distracting him from his single-minded pursuit of avenging his sister, and he shoves her away like really aggressively, like in a way that would
like Joe would
might get you reported to HR or arrested, but it's certainly familiar to other scenes I've seen from that era. Very dramatized kind of dance of young lovers, pushing and pulling. So
I think he's just got his mother's voice in his head being like, son, avenge this time, for me. And him, that, and it's him thinking of the mission and then shoving her away. Yeah, the first time watching this, you're just like, why is he beating her up? Like he fought together in this room. But the kiss scene I wanted to also talk about too, because it's another iconic shot that's of just Ivor Novello's face slowly coming into the camera and his lips coming towards us. And it's like this, obviously the women in the audience love this at this point. But I was thinking it's kind of the moment where the film is asking the audience, like, are you going to kiss Ivor Novello? Is he the killer or is he not? Like, you're kind of making what I'm guessing Daisy's choice is, which is, am I picking, is this really the guy, I'm with? But it is a great shot. And again, a lot of it's Ivor Novello's face, but it's so up close that it's a very deliberate Hitchcock shot that probably you wouldn't think to use. You wouldn't think to just frame the face like that. It's great. I really liked it though. Yeah, I wrote he's torn between Daisy and his mother. So, I said we didn't want to drag all these tie him to other movies, but there's another psycho element sort of going on there. Like a mother wants him to do something. So,
do you go out with friends?
Well, a boy's best friend is his mother.
A dead mother wants him to do something.
A dead mother. Yes. Didn't even put that together. So police arrive. We're nearing the end of the movie. We got a bunch of guys in suits. They got a warrant. It must have been easy to get a warrant back then. Just say, I thought about him kissing my girlfriend. He's the killer. So they search the room. Here is the discovery of the Maguffin, and where the whole movie unravels, which is the bag is pulled out. I wrote down just the 4 things that were in the bag. We have a gun. We have a map of the murders, which you've already seen him writing on. We have the newspaper clippings of all the murders happening. And we have a photo of what we find out to be is his sister, who's also the first victim that was killed, which all does seem suspicious. But Ivor Novello's got a really great, the lodger, the unnamed. Does the lodger have a name in the book, Sam?
Yes, but I can't remember what it is right now. He does have a name.
There was a point when he knocks on the door to the bathroom, just to take it back real quick, where she says, "Who's there?" You can see her lip mouthing it. And he says something that looks like a name. Like, it looks like he says, like Alan is here,
I don't think it's the lodger, but I don't think it's a name either. I think it might be the sleuth.
The sleuth.
Maybe. Yeah. In the novel. But
all right, so he's just the lodger.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this is where he's got the big story about his sister, and now we find out what he's really been doing the whole time.
Yeah, we find out that, and so we have a scene that takes us back to a younger Ivor Novello at it was at a coming out ball for his sister, right? A society ball, and that's where his sister disappears and is later found to be murdered.
Yeah, it's a really preposterous scene, and it kind of sets us up for everything that follows, which is equally kind of hard to believe. Not that the movie to this point had really like that was really seemed like a goal of the film, was realism. But when we watch the circumstances of the inciting incident, the thing that made the lodger who he is now, who is someone who is actually an Avenger, unlike the serial killer. He is somebody, or we don't know the serial killer story. Maybe he's avenging something too, but he's avenging the death of his sister, and his sister died at this ball, as you just said. And what happened was he turned the lights off, right? And like everybody's dancing and carousing and having a good time, and he's dancing with her.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, because even the newspaper article says she dies in his arms.
And the lights go out, and as the lights are out, nobody can see a damned thing. And when they come back on, she's been killed for no apparent reason, and the killer is nowhere to be found, and she's just left to die in his arms. So it's preposterous. It's absolutely, even by the standards of the movie, which we're suspending a little disbelief here.
In one of my readings somewhere, I read, I think that this is one of the added on scenes. The flashbacks were part of what was mandated to be put back in by Ivor Montague. And it does feel totally unnecessary because it's also showing us the same information we've seen twice already, which is girl murdered, crowd running around them. You're basically just going over, okay, we get it. Someone's killed. Everyone freaks out. Like everyone loves it. They're all trying to look at the body, on the ground.
Yeah. That is an interesting point. That, I mean, you're right. This is overkill, kind of absurd at this point. But yeah, there is the mob sort of hoarding around the body, and I do remember that actually from that particular scene where, there's these sort of otherwise, well-heeled, well-dressed, ladies and gentlemen who are sort of behaving like, I don't know, like a mob. They really want to get in there and look at that body, and they're kind of fighting over, they're jockeying for position to look at it. So it's not a good look.
Yeah. If there's anything to take away from this scene, I guess it's that the lurid fascination with murder is something that goes across social strata, right? Like in the beginning, it's the London rabble, and in this case it's the high society, but they're all equally kind of curious, more than shocked and horrified.
And how did the Avengers stab her in a packed room of people and somehow leave his calling card?
Yeah, while she's dancing with her brother.
Her brother would have
been
the lights out.
At least, yeah,
preposterous. Yes. So this leads to, Joe, he tells the story and Joe's just like, tell it to the judge. And then we get the great action scene of the lodger trying to strangle Joe. Very ineffective.
Yeah. Another thing where the limitations of either Hitchcock's skills had not yet developed in this way, but the action sequences in this movie are really just the weakest out of everything. There's so many inventive shots. What you were talking about earlier, when Daisy and the lodger have the kiss, the moment where you're seeing things from her point of view for the first time. There are tons of moments in this movie where the camera works in an interesting, inventive way. And then there are times like this where it's just like bad blocking and kind of an awkward framing, and it all feels really fake. And it continues. So we go from here to the lodger on the lamb, right? Or something. How do we connect those two dots, right? He fights with Joe, he runs back, he meets Daisy. I'm missing something.
He gets away from like a most ridiculous way. Like, Mrs. Bunting, they basically tell her, oh, he is the killer. And then she faints. And for some reason, none of these police guys are holding him. And he's just like, meet me at the thing, and books it.
It doesn't make any sense at all. They don't shoot at him. But maybe they don't carry guns. They're Londoners, right? They don't carry.
He got those handcuffs. You think if he got a gun, he'd been showing that off.
It was a different time. So she goes and she sees him kind of lying pathetically under the lamp, wrapped up in his coat. And this is where you certainly get a sense of the frailty of this character too.
Immediately,
and
he's immediately curled up into a ball.
Yeah, he's in a fetal position, and she's sort of starts to be the strong one, right? She's like like you're freezing, you're shivering. Let's go get you a brandy, And so it's like, never mind that you're wanted for murder. Let's go to a public place and get you a brandy. No, never mind that you have handcuffs on either. We'll just hide those. So this is actually where the movie kind of takes a turn for the absurd. So she's taking him to the bar and to get a brandy to warm him up. And they go into this public place and they make a very striking and odd couple, right? And he's got this jacket over his hands. And then she orders a brandy and she's basically giving him the brandy. And he's like an infant, he's like a child.
There's an old lady at the bar who instantly knows, like she's whispering, she's like, he's in handcuffs. Like,
right.
He's been there for a minute.
Right. I don't know how they deduced that because you couldn't see his hands at all. And then the guy standing next to the bar is like, "What's the matter? Did he lose his hands, miss? What business is of yours, old man? Go back to your beer." But she didn't say that to him. But she's giving him a drink, and then of course the whole bar starts to become alarmed because there's a murder on the loose, and there's clearly something suspicious about this couple. But that's also where you definitely, I got that Edward Scissorhands energy. From him.
So, and also coincidentally, this is the exact same bar that Joe obviously is super comfortable just running in to use phones in, so this is like, it seems like his main hangout. So Daisy clearly has no idea what Joe's day is like because they would 1 second earlier, he would have been in there. And because this is where he either makes the phone call or he receives the phone call.
He receives a phone call, right? Why was he in the bar? I think that was my question.
Because they wrote it that way.
Well, how did he get there though? Did Joe just show up with the other guys? Is that what happened?
Yeah, Joe just showed up like right after the lodger ran out.
I think it might have been, to give the film a little credit, I think it might have been that they were looking for him and they thought maybe he had ducked in there.
Yeah, they're hot on his trail.
They're hot on his trail, right? And yeah, so they go into the bar, but he's already left, and then somehow the crowd gets triggered that he's the killer, right?
Well, because the old lady at the bar who said the handcuffs, as soon as Joe comes in, he's talking to the police and he goes, says something like, well, he can't get far. He's in handcuffs. So the old lady's like, oh, there was a guy in here with handcuffs. So everyone in the bar just piles out.
Right. They're all just ready to go get some payback. And he gets a phone call that says that he's like, what?
Real Avenger.
The real Avenger's been caught red-handed. You don't ever know who this Avenger is. You don't know how he gets caught. You don't know why he gets caught. It's almost like the Avenger is a Maguffin, at this point.
Yeah, definitely.
He's just a plot device, and he doesn't really matter at all. He gets caught, and that's just it. We never know who he is or what his motive was or what it was about. It doesn't matter anymore. And so now it's about Joe having to go and protect the lodger from the raging mob.
Yeah, Sam, do you want to take this part? This iconic ending scene.
Well, yeah. So we have a pursuit of mob, and we now know, thanks to a well-timed phone call, innocent. Actual Avenger, someone who's trying to solve the crime rather than commit the crime. Although the line gets really blurry in this film. And, he's being hotly pursued by an angry mob of people who are convinced of his guilt, although we know his innocence. He attempts to scale a fence in his weak and ineffectual way, which is actually entirely consistent with the character. And then in a very awkward move, sort of snares himself with his handcuffs on this fence that he's trying to scale. So he ends up dangling on the fence where he's trying to make his escape. And the mob from all angles is now able to descend on him. And they start punching him with their fists in these really stagey looking, very not a lot of weight in them punches. And we see a little trickle of corn syrup coming from the lodger's mouth as
I think that was blood.
Comes to these blows. Yeah, it could have been. There was a lot of roughhousing. So that's where we leave the lodger. Is he's being unfairly assaulted by a crowd. and against all odds and all foreshadowing, he is actually not the killer. And yeah, and then
He's
what?
saved by Joe, actually.
He is saved by Joe, who Joe comes in, the knight in shining armor, and says, actually, this guy who I hate his guts and he stole my girlfriend, but he is not actually guilty. So Joe ends up being a good guy after all.
Yeah. I think as much as ridiculous as the scene is, I do think the shot of him hanging with the handcuffs is striking. It's another kind of iconic shot. It looks great. I feel like it's one of those scenes on paper, or maybe just even the shot itself is really interesting. It's just how do you get there is just ludicrous.
That whole scene is ludicrous in a way, but yeah, I do get what you're saying, and it sort of goes into a piece, and I have a hard time trying to kind of understand. I don't know, this type of character that he's demonstrating here as helpless, and beautiful but helpless, like very contrary to any sort of like masculine, notion that certainly we as like American males, would recognize.
Dylan! You son of a bitch! What's the matter? The CIA got you pushing too many pencils?
Right, but he certainly has always sort of come across as sort of this troubled and frail and slightly, dandyish, somewhat, I guess, effeminate man, and he's very frail, and it's just striking to me how frail he is, and that sort of last image of him hanging, with the trickle of ostensibly blood or corn syrup or whatever coming out of his mouth, and his eyebrows are raised, and it's almost like a Christ-like image, right? Wouldn't you say? Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a sense that he's looking up, why hast thou forsaken me, God? Kind of look to him, and then Joe is his ironically his savior. And
well, it turns out Joe's, he's it's like you could read him all along. He's a good guy at heart, He's just,
he's crude. He's a blunt instrument. Yeah.
I do want to point out here that my complete disagreement with any scholars that try to say that Hitchcock is in that crowd overlooking him, because having watched it a number of times, the character they say, there's a man who's kind of hitting him, that people point out, he's a heavy set man, looks like a Hitchcock. He's actually in the bar scene earlier. When they're in the bar, you can see him behind the bar, one of the bars, talking with people, and you can see him multiple times in that shot. And I can't see Hitchcock putting himself in that many scenes like over and over again. It seems ridiculous. Like it seems.
Yeah, I know the guy you're talking about. It doesn't
look like him. He's just heavy set, So, but a lot of things I've read are saying, oh, he's in the movie twice. He's at the end. He would have mentioned it in the Truffaut book too.
Yeah, that's true, and it might be a stretch, but it is worth mentioning. I thought the cameo was out of necessity, not the choice. So
yeah,
it
was
just
he didn't have enough necessity.
He didn't have enough extras.
Like he wouldn't put his face in multiple times at the end. Yeah, it's just I don't buy it one bit. Not a bit. I do check crowd scenes. I pause it a lot to be like there was one scene where I'm like, I think that's Alma Reville, not pause. But you never know. It's funny, all these extras, like in a modern movie today, you get this giant credits list with everybody who had anything to do with it, even guys who were in a scene that was cut. And in these movies, you get this huge cast, and these guys, who knows what happened, what their sob stories are, but they're not even listed in the, as being in the movie.
Yeah, the credits are very slender compared to where, you get the caterers nowadays, and, and those, it was really the director, and I guess the cinematographer, and the main.
It's like 5 names, and then it's like 8 or 9 actors. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
We'll see if it changes when it switches to sound. That'll be interesting to see. Maybe when they start talking, they take them more seriously. But so we get that ending, which would have been a perfectly fine ending. But then we get a second ending, which is, I guess, to show them happily ever after. We're in the lodge.
In the hospital first.
Oh yeah, the hospital.
The hospital scene is interesting. I mean, it's another goofy kind of scene, but they go to visit him, and Daisy's talking to the doctor, And I don't remember exactly what he says. Like he took quite a beating, but his youth and vigor will pull him through. And I'm like, vigor is not one word I would use to describe that character. Joe, yeah, but not him. But anyway, apparently the doctor disagreed, and he has a full recovery. And then the next scene is obviously at his mansion, and the Buntings show up to the mansion, I guess, for a visit.
Yeah, they couldn't leave out that great line, "You left your toothbrush behind."
Oh, right, which is comedic relief. Yeah.
Well, I think they just had to contrive a reason for them to be going to which makes no sense, but there it is.
My main take on the very end, I just wanted to bring this up, is that the second ending is the Tonight Golden Curls. To me, the movie's still ambiguous about him being a killer at the end. I think it does the slow zoom, the Tonight Golden Curls, and thinking about it, like him presenting it there is sort of ominous, because you think about it with the killer, the first killing at the beginning, it's over their shoulder. And then my observation from the very first time I watched this, which is that when she smiles, she has lipstick all over her teeth. And to me, that's the David Lynch letting you know type of shot. Things aren't perfect. Like maybe he was the killer. You know?
That's true. That's true, because the only indication you get is I mean, they say he was caught red-handed. So it's weird. It's like I think obviously this is where I think get it. You just see a conflict between what Hitchcock wanted and what the studio
was.
And Hitchcock probably did want to create an unsettling ending where they're out on the balcony alone together, and you see the Golden Curls sign, and it sort of takes you full circle to the first scene, and that there could be an air of menace. I don't think I noticed that until like the third time I watched it. That there was something about it that was unsettling. So I think that was Hitchcock. That was his part. That was his piece. Whereas the studio probably wanted to make it clear that Ivor Novello was not the killer.
We don't know what the original cut looked like. It might have had none of that stuff, and the ending might have been pretty cool. So I guess we may never know, unfortunately.
I also noted that the lodger is still overacting in these scenes, which is, I guess, I don't know if you're trying to be consistent with earlier, but I'm like, we know he's not the killer. So I think that's the other part that made me sort of like, this is not settling for me.
Yeah. It might have just been the reshoots that shifted the tone dramatically, and we were left with what was originally intended to be the ending, but none of the overtones make any sense anymore.
Right.
Okay. I think this was a solid 2 out of 5, because although it had plenty of flaws, it was not a consistent story. There were a lot of dramatic tonal shifts. There were a lot of things that just made absolutely no sense. And there were a lot of things that, watching it in 2021, are just like completely look ridiculous. But having said all that, there were some great things. The camera work, I really liked Ivor Novello. I thought he was an interesting character to watch for the length of this movie. Not a perfect film, but definitely a one with a lot of art in it, a lot of great visuals, and a lot of I think that opening sequence stands out in this movie. If you were to watch just the first, I think it's 15 minutes before the lodger story actually begins, there's this lengthy introduction. I think that holds up perfectly well today. I think that's just an interesting little piece of film, and it's remarkable how Hitchcock weaves these themes in throughout this kind of sort of boilerplate or pot boiler story, and does it with a lot of art, and I think was working within the limitations that were presented to him, and obviously was young and still developing his voice and his art, his craft. So it's a solid movie. I'd say a 2 is a pretty good score. So 2.
My thoughts on this movie are, number one, I like it. It's a complete movie. We saw The Pleasure Garden, not a complete movie. This movie, I think, is a good entryway for somebody into silent film. To me, I'm a little bit more generous towards it than I think Sam was, in that first off, let me just go. I'm giving it 4 out of 5 MacGuffins. I really enjoyed this movie, and maybe it took multiple times of watching it. I like the dream-like kind of atmosphere of the weird acting. Ivor Novello he's just great. He's great to watch. Joe, I grew on me in multiple watchings. I like what these guys are doing. And Mrs. Bunting was really great. It's good acting. It's a tight story. It's pretty simple, really. It's not super complex. Is it ridiculous a little and slightly unbelievable? Yes. But just the camera angles are so striking. There's such good shots throughout the movie. I just really enjoyed it as for what it was. I'm giving it a higher grade, I think, because I'm anticipating. I don't know. I'm thinking the future ones we're going to watch might fit in the Pleasure Garden category. This one just seems, reading it off the box, something that's easier to engage with, I think, for a regular person. So if I were to recommend a silent era movie, this one might be up there with Nosferatu, probably even before Metropolis, which to me is a little bit more difficult of a movie to recommend to somebody to watch. This is just, you're not going to lose what's going on because there's no sound. I don't want to just keep making it be like, it's simple, so it's good, but it's the dreamlike atmosphere, the fog, I like the tinting in this movie. I enjoyed this movie. 4 out of 5 MacGuffins. Enough said. Lance.
Oh, I don't think I'm that generous, but I do agree that after repeated viewings, this movie grew on me quite a bit. It's filled with very iconic imagery. It's beautiful to look at. There's a lot of very innovative scenes and camera work. It's let down by a shoddy story, or at least a story that was obviously maybe not what the director intended. You certainly feel that conflict later in the movie between what the studio wanted and what Hitchcock's vision was. But certainly earlier in the movie, I think he was firmly. It feels like he was firmly in control, right, of the film, and it has his stamp all over it. It feels like he loses control near the end of the movie, and that's where the really absurd stuff happens. And I think that there's a lot of scenes that I just think to a modern eye, maybe it was more acceptable. Again, these are early days, and I'm probably grading on a curve, and maybe that's arrogant, to say like, oh, as a modern viewer, we're so much smarter than those dumb people in the olden times. But I mean, it was a new medium, and so I'm gonna kind of cut a little bit of slack. But I give it 3 MacGuffins. I think it's certainly. In the beginning and halfway through the movie, you definitely get a sense of this is a Hitchcock movie. It has his stamp all over it, and he's firmly in control of it stylistically. It only kind of comes off the rails, later in the film, and just has a few scenes that we've discussed that were just ridiculous. That's why I have to subtract a couple of MacGuffins for that.
3 of the 5 you gave it?
We're all over the map. We got a 2, we got a 3.
I like that we're not all like just the same thing. I think it's better to be critical, that some of us are critical in different areas. Otherwise it'd just be boring. All right. Next time on Presenting Alfred Hitchcock, we will be reviewing Hitchcock's 4th film, Downhill. So if you enjoyed Ivor Novello, buckle up. We're going to be seeing them again. This movie's also from 1927. And the great news is, if you listen to us and bought The Lodger on Blu-ray or DVD, you already own Downhill. It is an extra on those. If you didn't and you bought the Criterion app to watch The Lodger, you can also watch Downhill there. It is the BFI restored version. Or you can watch it on YouTube and just figure it out yourself. Buy the Stop and Shop version for, with 20 movies on it. That's all I got. See y'all next time.
Cue outro music and
the phrase I use is moronic logic.